Without making a sound, Edward backed down the hallway and entered his office through the side door. But he couldn't concentrate on the documents he had come to retrieve. The image of that woman and her whispered words continued to echo in his mind, awakening questions he had buried long ago about purpose, happiness, and the true meaning of success. On that Christmas Eve, two lives were about to intertwine in a way neither could imagine, beginning a journey that would test not only their feelings, but also their deepest convictions about love, dignity, and the courage needed to open their hearts again. January brought with it the typical humid heat of a summer day in Maplewood, causing the air conditioning in the office building to work at full capacity. Mary returned to work after the holiday festivities with a discreet smile on her face. She had managed to buy Sophie's dream doll, even if it meant living on rice, beans, and eggs for the next 2 months. The radiant smile of her daughter on Christmas morning had been worth every penny saved and every extra hour worked. What Mary didn't realize was that her life was about to take a completely unexpected turn. Edward had spent the Christmas break thinking about that cleaning staff member who he had heard whispering her prayers in the empty hallway. The sincerity of that moment haunted him, contrasting drastically with the artificial world he lived in, filled with hidden agendas and calculated relationships. In the first meeting of the year with his human resources team, he made a decision that surprised everyone. "I want to implement a scholarship program for the children of contracted employees," Edward announced during the meeting, his firm voice echoing in the conference room on the 25th floor. The glass table reflected the surprised expressions of the executives present, while the panoramic view of the city served as a backdrop for that unexpected declaration. Carla Johnson, his executive secretary for 8 years, raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. At 44, she was an elegant and calculating woman, always impeccably dressed in designer clothes that complemented her mature beauty. Her blonde hair was kept in a sophisticated bob, and her blue eyes concealed an ambition that bordered on obsession. "Edward, this will represent a significant cost," Carla said, her voice smooth but laden with disapproval. "Wouldn't it be more prudent to focus on benefits for our direct employees?" "The decision has already been made," Edward replied, closing off any discussion. "I want you to prepare a statement for all departments. The program will start next semester." 2 weeks later, when Mary learned of the news through a notice posted on the service area bulletin board, her first reaction was disbelief. She read the paper 3 times, making sure she wasn't dreaming. The Bright Future program offered full scholarships at private schools for the children of contracted employees who demonstrated financial need and good academic performance. That afternoon, Mary sought out the cleaning supervisor, Mrs. Johnson, a 58-year-old woman who had worked in the building for over 2 decades. They met in the small room that served as a locker room and materials storage located in the basement of the building. "Mrs. Johnson, do you think this is for real?" Mary asked, holding the notice with trembling hands. "Isn't this some kind of prank?" Mrs. Johnson, a woman with grey hair always tied in a low bun and kind eyes that had seen many changes in the company, smiled tenderly. "Honey, I know this building like the back of my hand. In all these years, I've never seen Dr. Edward do anything he didn't follow through on. If it's written there, it's because it's going to happen." But when Mary got home that night, in the small 2-room apartment she shared with Sophie in Maplewood, pride spoke louder than need. The apartment was simple but organized, with furniture she had bought used and lovingly restored. The walls were decorated with drawings from Sophie and some plants that Mary tended to on the small balcony overlooking the busy Maple Avenue. "Mum, what's a scholarship?" Sophie asked, her curious eyes shining as she played with the doll she had received for Christmas. The girl was a miniature version of Mary, with the same brown hair and expressive eyes, but carried a natural joy that her mother sometimes envied. "It's when someone pays for a child to go to school for free," Mary explained. sitting next to her daughter on the two-seater sofa that took up almost the entire living room. "Like Julinha's school in my class. She said her school has a pool and a computer lab." Mary felt her heart tighten. Sophie attended a public school that, despite the teachers' efforts, faced infrastructure challenges and overcrowding. The girl deserved so much more, but accepting that scholarship would be like admitting she couldn't take care of her own daughter. "Sweetheart, we don't need anyone's help. Mommy works hard to give you everything you need," Mary said, more to herself than to her daughter. The following Monday, Mary made a decision that would torment her for the next few weeks. She headed to the Human Resources Department on the 15th floor, an environment she only knew from passing by during her cleaning rounds. The room was modern, with light furniture and ornamental plants that created a welcoming yet professional atmosphere. Anna Beatrice, the HR coordinator, a young woman in her 30s with a genuine smile, greeted her warmly. "Mary, I'm so glad you came. We've practically filled out all your paperwork. We just need you to sign here, and Sophie can start at St. Cecilia Academy next semester." "Actually, I came to say that I won't be accepting," Mary said, the words struggling to come out of her throat. Anna Beatrice blinked, confused. "Sorry, I didn't understand." "Is there a problem with the chosen school? We can see other options. It's not the school, it's just, I don't accept charity. I work honestly to support my daughter, and I don't need favors." Mary's response echoed through the department, turning a few heads. Anna Beatrice tried to argue, explaining that it wasn't charity, but an official company program, but Mary had already made up her mind. What she didn't know was that Edward had instructed Anna Beatrice to inform him immediately if any employee refused to participate in the program. When he received the call, he felt a mix of frustration and admiration for the dignity of that woman. That afternoon, something unprecedented happened at Almeida and Associates Construction. Edward Almeida left his office on the 25th floor and took the elevator down to the 20th floor, where Mary was working. It was the first time in years that he walked through the operational floors of the company without being accompanied by an entourage of executives. Mary was cleaning the windows of the conference room when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She turned around and nearly dropped the spray bottle upon seeing the man she had only seen in photographs in business newspapers that she occasionally flipped through in the health clinic's waiting room. Edward was even more imposing in person. He wore a charcoal grey suit that accentuated his authoritative presence, but his brown eyes held an expression she couldn't decipher. A mix of curiosity and something that seemed almost vulnerability. "Mary Santos?" he asked, his deep and well-modulated voice. "Yes, sir," she replied, automatically straightening her posture and wiping her hands on her uniform. "I heard that you refused to participate in our scholarship program. I would like to understand why." Mary felt her face flush. Being face-to-face with the CEO of the company, being questioned about her decision, was a situation she was not prepared for. But her natural honesty spoke louder than her nervousness. "Mr. Edward, I really appreciate the opportunity, but I can't accept something I haven't earned. I work hard every day, and I prefer to achieve things through my own effort." Edward observed her for a long moment, noticing how she looked him directly in the eye despite her obvious nervousness. There was no subservience in her posture, only respect and an unshakable dignity. "What if I told you that your daughter earned this opportunity through your dedicated work, that this program exists precisely to recognize employees like you?" Mary hesitated, feeling the foundations of her decision tremble in light of a perspective she hadn't considered. The following days passed in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions for Mary. The conversation with Edward had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, making her question whether her refusal was motivated more by pride than by dignity. At night, after Sophie was asleep, she lay awake staring at the ceiling of the small room they shared, thinking of his words, "Your daughter earned this opportunity through your dedicated work." Edward, for his part, couldn't get Mary out of his mind. There was something about that woman that intrigued him deeply, a silent strength, a rare integrity in the world he lived in. For the first time in years, he found himself altering his daily routine, making excuses to pass by the floors where she worked. The following Tuesday, Edward was reviewing contracts in his office when he decided to go down to get a coffee in the break room on the 20th floor. Something he never did. His secretary always brought imported coffee directly to his office. The break room was a simple yet cozy environment, with an espresso machine the company had installed for employees, a few round tables, and a shared refrigerator. Mary was there, preparing her lunch in a simple aluminum container. When she saw him enter, she nearly dropped her food on the floor. "Mr. Edward, are you lost?" she asked, genuinely concerned. He laughed, a sound that surprised both of them, as it had been a long time since Edward had laughed naturally. "No, I came to get a coffee." "May I?" "Of course, sir. It's just that, well, I don't know if the coffee here is up to the standard you're used to," Mary said, gesturing towards the simple machine. "I'm sure it's great," Edward replied, approaching the machine. As he prepared the coffee, he noticed that Mary had opened a container containing only rice, beans, and a small piece of chicken. "Do you always have lunch here?" Mary blushed slightly. "Yes, sir. It's more practical and more economical." Edward felt a pang in his chest. He knew executives who spent on a lunch what this woman probably earned in a week, and there she was, making choices based on necessity, not pleasure. "Mary, may I ask you a personal question?" She stopped stirring the beans, looking at him cautiously. "Of course, Mr. Edward. Why is it so hard for you to accept help?" The question caught her off guard. Mary put down her fork and fell silent for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "You know, Mr. Edward, I grew up watching my mother work as a maid in wealthy households. She was always treated kindly, but there was an invisible line she could never cross. She was always reminded of her place, you know? And when people do favors for someone like me, it always comes with a hidden cost, even if they don't realize it." Edward sat down in the chair across from her, completely forgetting about corporate hierarchies. "What if I guaranteed that there is no cost, that it's simply the recognition that your daughter deserves the same opportunities as any child?" Mary studied him with those almond-shaped eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Do you have children, Mr. Edward?" The question hit him like an unexpected blow. Edward lowered his gaze to his coffee cup. "I do. A daughter, Isabella. She's 10 years old, but she lives in London with my ex-wife." "Do you see her often?" "Not as much as I would like," he admitted, feeling a strange familiarity in opening up to an employee he had known for only a few weeks. "Work has always been an easy excuse." Mary leaned in, head, and her voice softened. "So you understand what it means to want to give the best for a daughter, even when circumstances don't help." "I understand. But in my case, circumstances have always helped financially. Emotionally, that's another story." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, as if they were recognizing something in common, despite their very different realities. "Dr. Edward," Mary finally said, "if I accept this scholarship for Sophie, will it cause problems for you? I mean, the other staff, the board." Edward looked at her intensely. "Mary, I own this company, and if there's one thing I've learned in the past few years, it's that money only has value when used for something that truly matters." That afternoon, Mary made a decision that would change the course of her life. She went back to HR and signed the scholarship papers. When Anna handed her the enrollment confirmation for Sophie at St. Cecilia Academy, Mary felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. But what she didn't know was that Carla Smith had observed the entire interaction between her and Edward through the building's security cameras. The executive secretary watched the recordings 3 times, analyzing every gesture, every glance, every smile exchanged between them in the break room. Carla had worked for years to earn the position she held, always maintaining a respectful professional distance from Edward, patiently waiting for him to notice her qualities beyond work. Seeing a cleaning staff member gain in weeks the attention she hadn't achieved in years sparked a cold, calculating fury within her. That night, Carla called her sister, Patricia, who worked as a journalist for a business gossip magazine. "Patricia, you won't believe what's happening at the company," Carla said, her voice laced with venom disguised as concern. "Edward is getting involved with a contracted employee. It's a scandal waiting to happen." "Are you sure? Edward has always been so reserved," Patricia replied, already sniffing out a juicy story. "I have footage from the security cameras. They are meeting secretly, talking like they are intimate. Imagine what this could do to the company's reputation if it leaks." While Carla sowed the seeds of discord, Mary arrived home with a smile on her face that Sophie hadn't seen in months. The girl, who was doing homework at the kitchen table, looked up at her mother with curiosity. "Mom, did something good happen? You seem different." Mary knelt beside her daughter and hugged her. "Sophie, sweetheart, Mommy has a surprise for you. Next semester you're going to study at a new school, a really good school, with a computer lab, a large library, and even English classes." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really, Mom? Better than Julinia's school?" "Even better," Mary said, feeling her heart fill with a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. "And do you know what that means? That all your hard work in school has paid off. You earned this, my love." That night, while Sophie slept hugging her Christmas doll, Mary stood on the small balcony, looking at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. She had no idea that forces were moving behind the scenes, threatening to destroy the happiness that was beginning to bloom in her life. February arrived, bringing that peculiar atmosphere of São Paulo post-carnival, when the city resumes its frantic pace after the days of celebration. At Almeida and Associates Construction, the hallways echoed once again, with the sound of urgent meetings and phones ringing incessantly. But for Mary, the days had taken on a new color since Sophie started studying at St. Cecilia Academy. The girl came home every day overflowing with enthusiasm, talking about computer classes, the library with thousands of books, and the new friends she had made. Mary felt her heart warm as she watched her daughter flourish in an environment that was finally worthy of her natural intelligence. "Mom, today, the English teacher said I have a knack for learning languages," Sophie said one afternoon while showing her notebook filled with neat notes. "And guess what? Tomorrow we're going to visit the science lab." Mary smiled, watching her daughter talk about her day while organizing the school supplies on the little table in the living room. Each new book, each different activity represented a world of opportunities she had never imagined she could offer Sophie. Meanwhile, on the 25th floor of the building, Edward faced a crisis that threatened to shake the foundations of his company. During a tense meeting late in the afternoon, the numbers presented by the CFO, Robert Anderson, painted a worrying picture. "Edward, we need to face reality," said Robert, a 55-year-old man with grey hair and a perpetually serious expression. "Construction material costs have risen by 40% in the last 6 months. If we don't take drastic measures, we'll have to cancel 3 ongoing projects." The meeting room fell into absolute silence. The 10 executives present avoided looking directly at Edward, who was analyzing the spreadsheets with an impenetrable expression. Carla, sitting to his right, took notes on her tablet, but her eyes frequently strayed to observe her boss's face. "What are the options?" Edward asked, his voice controlled, despite the evident tension. "Mass layoffs," Robert replied bluntly. "Mainly of contracted employees. We can cut operational costs by up to 60%. Edward felt a knot in his stomach. The first image that came to his mind was Mary, working diligently through the hallways, supporting Sophie with her unwavering determination. And it wasn't just her. There were hundreds of families depending on those jobs. "Does that have to be the solution?" he asked, flipping through the reports in search of alternatives. "Unless someone here has a miraculous idea," Robert said, with a tone that made his opinion on the matter clear. At that moment, Mary was 3 floors down, cleaning the conference room of the engineering department. She had developed the habit of paying attention to the engineers' conversations, not out of curiosity, but because she found it interesting to understand how the company she worked for operated. That afternoon, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. "It's an absurd waste," said engineer Paul Smith, pointing to a spreadsheet. "We throw away tons of material every month because suppliers deliver in standardized quantities, but each project has specific needs." "Oh, and it has always been this way," replied his colleague, civil engineer Fernando Brown. "But imagine if we could calculate exactly what each project needs and negotiate customized deliveries, or even reuse materials between different projects." Mary stopped cleaning the table, processing that information. In her experience as a cleaner, she had worked in several companies and had always noticed the waste. Office supplies thrown away when they were still usable, cleaning products bought in excess, equipment replaced when it could have been repaired. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Mary sat at the kitchen table with a pen and some sheets of paper she had brought from work. She began to write, organizing her observations about the waste she had noticed over the years at the construction company. The next morning, something unprecedented happened. Mary finished her cleaning shift early and, instead of leaving, headed to the Human Resources Department. Anna greeted her with surprise. "Mary, how are you? Is there a problem with Sophie's school?" "No, Anna. Actually, I wanted to talk to someone about an idea I had. Something that could help the company save money." Anna blinked, confused. "What kind of idea?" Mary took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I know it may sound strange, a cleaning staff member giving suggestions, but I observe a lot while I work, and I think the company is losing money in ways that could be avoided." Intrigued, Anna asked Mary to explain. For the next 20 minutes, Mary detailed her observations. Construction materials that were discarded when they could be reused, suppliers delivering excessive quantities, equipment that was replaced when simple maintenance would solve the problem. "Mary, this is impressive," said Anna, genuinely surprised. "Do you have all this written down?" Mary handed over the sheets she had filled out the night before. "I'm not good with numbers like you are, but I know that every dollar saved makes a difference." Anna examined the notes, recognizing the logic behind each observation. "Mary, I need to show this to the board. Would you mind presenting your ideas in person?" Mary's blood ran cold. "Presenting? To whom?" "To Dr. Edward and the executive team. They are looking for solutions to cut costs, and your observations might be exactly what we need." Mary felt her legs go weak. The idea of speaking to a room full of executives terrified her, but at the same time, she knew this could be a unique opportunity to really make a difference. "If you think it can help," she said, her voice hesitant. 2 hours later, Edward was in his office when Anna knocked on the door, accompanied by Mary. Carla, who was organizing the day's schedule, looked up with a barely concealed expression of surprise and displeasure. "Edward, sorry to interrupt, but Mary has a proposal that I believe is relevant to today's meeting," Anna said. Edward looked at Mary, noticing her evident nervousness. She held a stack of papers with slightly trembling hands, but her eyes showed a determination he had learned to admire. "Of course, Mary. Please, have a seat and tell me your idea." As Mary began to explain her observations about waste in the company, Carla watched the scene with growing irritation. Seeing a cleaning staff member being welcomed into Edward's private office, discussing business matters as if she were a consultant, stirred a fury in her that she could barely control. This is absolutely ridiculous, Carla thought, typing furiously on her tablet. A cleaner giving business advice. Edward has completely lost his mind. But as Mary spoke, Edward leaned forward, genuinely interested. Her observations were simple, practical, and impressively accurate. For the first time in weeks, he glimpsed an alternative to the mass layoffs that Robert had proposed. Mary's presentation lasted almost an hour. Edward asked detailed questions about each observation, taking notes on his tablet while she explained with a captivating simplicity how small changes in processes could lead to significant savings. When she finished, the office fell silent for a few seconds. "Mary," Edward finally said, "your observations are remarkable. With your permission, I would like to implement some of these ideas immediately and present others to the board." Mary felt her face flush. "Dr. Edward, I just wanted to help. I don't expect anything in return." "But I do expect to give something in return," he replied, smiling. "How about we work together on these proposals? I need someone with your practical vision to ensure that the implementations work in practice." Carla, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "Edward, are you sure about this? It might be better for our consulting department to review these suggestions before making any hasty decisions." The irritation in Carla's voice did not go unnoticed by Edward, who looked at her with a questioning expression. "Carla, these suggestions could save hundreds of jobs. I think it's worth acting quickly." That afternoon, Edward called an extraordinary meeting with all the directors. The conference room was tense as he presented Mary's proposals, initially not mentioning who had formulated them. The projected numbers were impressive. A potential 35% savings in operating costs without the need for layoffs. "Where did these analyses come from?" Robert asked, examining the spreadsheets Edward had prepared based on Mary's notes. "From someone who knows our operation better than we imagined," Edward replied. "Someone who is on the front lines every day and has the perspective that we, in our offices, lack when we lose." When Edward revealed that the ideas had come from a cleaning staff member, the silence in the room was absolute. Some directors exchanged skeptical glances, but the numbers spoke for themselves. "Edward," said Robert cautiously, "I'm not questioning the quality of the ideas, but a contracted employee doing business consulting, isn't that going to generate comments?" "What kind of comments?" Edward asked, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. "Well, you know, people might think there are other reasons for this sudden closeness with an employee." Edward slowly stood up, his presence dominating the room. "Robert, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. We're talking about saving this company and the jobs of hundreds of families. If someone has a problem with that, they can look for work elsewhere." The tension in the room was palpable. Carla, who had remained discreet throughout the meeting, felt a dark satisfaction seeing her suspicions about the board's reactions being confirmed. Meanwhile, Mary had returned to her work on the lower floors, trying to process what had happened. The idea of working directly with Edward on a business project felt surreal. She was cleaning the restrooms on the 18th floor when her phone rang. "Mary Santos," said an unfamiliar female voice. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Patricia Smith. I'm a journalist from Executives and Business magazine. I would like to talk to you about your closeness with CEO Edward Almeida." Mary felt her blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, Mary. I have information that you two have been meeting frequently, that he is giving special treatment to you and your daughter. Readers would love to know more about this peculiar friendship." "That's a lie," Mary said, her voice trembling with indignation. "I work honestly here and have never done anything inappropriate." "Calm down, dear. I'm not judging. I just want your version of the story. How about we meet for coffee? I can pay well for an exclusive interview." Mary hung up the phone, her hands shaking. How could someone be spreading lies about her? And where did they get information about Sophie? That same afternoon, Edward received a similar call in his office. Patricia Smith had used a different approach with him, pretending to be a journalist interested in doing a piece on business innovation. "Dr. Edward, I heard your company is implementing a revolutionary internal consulting project. Is it true that you are working with a contracted employee who, how can I put this, has gained your trust in a very special way?" Edward hung up the phone immediately, but the seed of concern had been planted. He was well aware of the world of specialized press and knew how rumors could turn into manufactured scandals. Carla watched everything from her desk, pretending to work on reports, but actually tracking Edward's every move. When she saw his worried expression after the call, she felt a satisfaction she could barely disguise. The next day, Mary arrived at work to find strange looks from some colleagues, conversations that stopped when she passed by, whispers behind her back. At lunchtime, Mrs. Johnson called her for a private talk. "Mary, my dear, I need to warn you about something," said the supervisor, her voice heavy with concern. "There are people spreading rumors about you and Dr. Edward, saying that that there's something beyond work going on." Mary felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "But how, Mrs. Johnson? I barely spoke to him outside of work meetings." "I know, dear. I've known you for years and I know your character. But you know how it is. People with envy are capable of anything." That afternoon, when Edward came down to get Mary for a meeting about implementing operational changes, he immediately noticed something was wrong. She was pale, her eyes red as if she had been crying. "Mary, what happened?" "Dr. Edward, I think I can't work on this project with you anymore." "Why? Did something happen?" Mary looked around, noticing the curious gazes of other employees. "People are talking, saying things that aren't true about us." Edward felt a cold anger rise in his chest. "What kind of things?" "That I'm taking advantage of you. That there's something inappropriate between us. Even journalists have called me Dr. Edward. I can't go through this, and I can't let it affect you, too." Edward looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. "Mary, do you care about what I think about this?" "Of course I care, sir." "Then know that you are one of the most honest people I've ever met, and if someone is spreading lies, we will find out who it is and why." Mary shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Dr. Edward, you don't understand. People like me, when the rich take an interest in us, they always think it's for ulterior motives. There's always a price to pay. And I can't risk my reputation or Sophie's." Seeing the desperation in her eyes, Edward made a decision that would change everything. "Mary, I will find out who is behind this. And when I do, that person will bitterly regret messing with you." That night, Carla was working late in her office when the phone rang. It was her sister, Patricia. "Carla, I got some interesting information. The employee seems too honest to accept money for an interview, but I managed to scare her quite a bit. And Edward also seems to be worried about the phone calls." "Great," Carla said, a cold smile on her lips. "Keep pushing. I want this situation to end soon." What Carla didn't know was that Edward had discreetly hired a corporate security firm to investigate information leaks within the company, and that phone calls from all employees with access to confidential information were being monitored, including hers. The truth was about to come to light, and when it did, there would be consequences no one could foresee. The month of March brought with it a palpable tension in the atmosphere at Almeida and Associates Construction. Mary had withdrawn even further into her work, avoiding any unnecessary contact with the upper floors. She arrived early, completed her tasks with her usual efficiency, and left promptly, not lingering in the casual conversation she once enjoyed with her colleagues. Edward, for his part, was becoming increasingly frustrated. The implementation of Mary's ideas was yielding extraordinary results. The company had saved nearly $80,000 in just the first month, but he could barely speak to the person responsible for these revolutionary changes. It was a rainy Thursday when everything changed. Edward was working late when he received a call from Marcus Taylor, the director of the corporate security firm they had hired. "Dr. Edward, I need to speak with you urgently. We've discovered the source of the information leaks and, well, it's better if we talk in person." An hour later, Marcus was in Edward's office with a folder full of documents and recordings. He was a tall, lean man, a former federal agent with sharp eyes that missed no detail. "Dr. Edward, you're not going to like what I'm about to show you," said Marcus, connecting an audio device to the laptop. "The calls are being made from inside the company, specifically from your executive assistant's phone." Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Carla, that can't be right." "Unfortunately, it is. She has a sister named Patricia Smith, who works for the magazine Executives and Business. They have been coordinating a campaign to create a scandal involving you and the employee Mary Santos." Marcus played the recordings of the conversations between the sisters. Carla's voice echoed in the room, cold and calculating, as she instructed Patricia on how to pressure Mary and create insinuations about an inappropriate relationship. "I want her to quit working with Edward, and I want him to realize that this closeness with an inferior employee will only bring problems for the company," Carla's voice said in the recording. Edward listened in silence, his expression growing darker. When the recordings ended, he was visibly shaken. "There's more," said Marcus. "She also tried to sabotage some of the implementations suggested by Mary, altering purchase orders and creating intentional delays. Apparently she feared that the project's success would draw even more attention to the employee." Edward stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Carla had worked with him for 8 years. He trusted her with confidential information, his personal schedule, intimate aspects of his professional life. The betrayal hurt more than he wanted to admit. "Dr. Edward," Marcus said cautiously, "there's something else you need to know. According to our investigations, Mrs. Carla has been, how can I put this, harboring personal feelings for you for years. Apparently she saw Mary as a threat, not only professionally but also personally." Edward closed his eyes, feeling a mix of nausea and anger. "Marcus, I need you to prepare all the necessary documentation for termination for just cause. And I want a court order to stop the magazine from publishing anything about me or Mary immediately. I'm already taking care of everything, Dr. Edward, but there's a complication. The magazine already has an article practically ready. According to my source there, they intend to publish in the next edition." That same night, Mary was at home helping Sophie with her homework when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but this time she answered with suspicion. "Mary, this is Dr. Edward. I need to speak with you urgently." "Dr. Edward, how did you get my personal number? It's in your company file. Mary, I've found out who was spreading the lies about us. Can I come to your house? There are things you need to know." Mary hesitated. Having the CEO of the company in her humble apartment in Maplewood felt surreal and potentially problematic, but something in his voice made her agree. "Okay, but, Dr. Edward, it's very simple here. I don't know if you'll feel comfortable. Mary, after everything that's happened, that's the least of my problems." An hour later, Edward parked his BMW on the street outside Mary's house. The contrast was striking. He, wearing a suit that cost more than the monthly salary of many families in that area, walking through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. Some neighbors watched him with curiosity, but without hostility. Mary welcomed him at the door, clearly nervous. "Dr. Edward, come in. Sorry for the simplicity." The apartment was small but impeccably organized. The furniture was simple, but everything was clean and neatly arranged with care. There were plants on the small balcony, drawings by Sophie stuck to the refrigerator, and a sense of home that Edward's penthouse, with all its luxuries, had never provided. Sophie appeared from the kitchen, carrying a doll, the same one Mary had painstakingly bought for Christmas. The girl stopped when she saw Edward, her eyes widening. "Mom, who is the elegant man?" Edward smiled, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "Hello, Sophie. I'm Edward, a friend of your mum's from work, and you must be the smartest girl in the new school." Sophie smiled, clearly delighted by the attention. "How do you know I'm smart?" "Because your mum always talks about you with so much pride. She told me you're doing really well in your English classes." Mary watched the interaction with a mix of tenderness and apprehension. Seeing Edward talking naturally with Sophie, treating her with genuine interest and affection, stirred feelings in her that she had tried to suppress. "Sophie, sweetheart, go finish your homework in your room. Dr. Edward and I need to talk about work," said Mary. Once they were alone in the small living room, Edward told her everything about the discovery of Carla's betrayal. Mary listened in silence, her expressions shifting between shock, relief, and indignation. "So, she made everything up?" Mary asked when Edward finished. "Everything, and she did it because—" Edward hesitated, looking for the right words. "Because she was jealous of the attention I was giving you?" Mary blushed, lowering her gaze. "Dr. Edward, I never wanted to cause any trouble." "Mary, look at me," said Edward, his voice soft yet firm. When she raised her eyes, he continued, "You didn't cause any trouble at all. On the contrary, you brought something to my life that I didn't know was missing." "What do you mean?" Edward took a deep breath, preparing for one of the most important conversations of his life. "I mean that, in the past few months, talking to you, seeing your dedication, your honesty, your strength, I discovered what it truly means to admire someone. Not for what they have, but for who they are." Mary felt her heart race. "Dr. Edward, I know our realities are very different. I know people will question, will judge, but Mary, I care about you, and I care about Sophie, and if you allow me, I would like to be part of your lives." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Mary struggled between what her heart desired and what her mind deemed prudent. "Dr. Edward," she finally said, "you are a good man, and I also care about you, more than I should. But we come from very different worlds, and I have Sophie to think about. I can't risk her stability because of my feelings." Edward stepped closer, stopping just a few inches from her. "What if I guaranteed that Sophie will always be protected, that regardless of what happens between us, she will always have all the support she needs?" Mary looked into his eyes, seeing a sincerity that deeply moved her. But before she could respond, Edward's phone rang. It was Marcus Johnson. "Dr. Edward, we have an emergency. The magazine has moved up the publication date. The article goes live tomorrow morning." Friday morning dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself anticipated the storm that was about to come. Mary woke up with a knot in her stomach, Edward's words from the night before echoing in her mind. She had spent hours awake, reliving every moment of their conversation, every glance, every word laden with meaning. Sophie was particularly excited during breakfast, talking about a school presentation she would give next week on careers. "Mum, can I talk about construction? Dr. Edward explained to me yesterday how big buildings are made." Mary smiled, but her heart tightened. The ease with which Sophie had connected with Edward both thrilled and terrified her. What if everything went wrong? How would she explain to her daughter the sudden disappearance of that kind man who had gained her trust so quickly? At 7:30 a.m., when Mary arrived at the construction company, she immediately sensed that something was different. The security guards at the front desk looked at her with strange expressions, and in the elevator, 2 employees from the sales department whispered something when she entered, abruptly stopping their conversation. On the 20th floor, Mrs. Johnson was waiting for her with a worried expression and a magazine in hand. "Mary, my dear, you need to see this," said the supervisor, extending the publication with trembling hands. The cover of Executives and Business featured a photo of Edward exiting the executive elevator, alongside a smaller image of Mary pushing her cleaning cart. The headline in bold letters read, "The Forbidden Romance. Millionaire CEO and the maid who captured his heart. Mary felt the world spin around her. With trembling hands, she opened the magazine and read the article that filled 3 whole pages. The report, written by Patricia Smith, was filled with malicious insinuations, suggestions that Mary had taken advantage of her position to seduce her boss, and speculations about sexual favors in exchange for benefits for her daughter. Internal sources reveal that the contracted employee, Mary Sanders, 34, has been frequently meeting with CEO Edward Almeida at suspicious times and locations. The coincidence between these meetings and a scholarship mysteriously granted to the employee's daughter raises questions about the true selection criteria of the company's social program. Mary couldn't finish reading. Her legs buckled, and she had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. Mrs. Johnson supported her gently. "Calm down, dear. Everyone here knows this is a lie. You are a woman of character." But Mary knew that Mrs. Johnson's opinion would not be enough to protect her from the storm that was coming. She could already imagine the looks in the hallways, the whispers in the break rooms, the malicious speculations spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, on the 25th floor, Edward was in his office with a copy of the same magazine, his expression alternating between fury and despair. Marcus Johnson was present, along with 2 company lawyers. "This is pure and simple defamation," said Dr. Richard Taylor, the lead attorney. "We can sue the magazine and demand a retraction." "But the damage is already done," Edward replied, crumpling the magazine with force. "Mary will suffer the consequences of this long before any legal action." Carla had arrived at work as usual, at 8 a.m. sharp, pretending to be natural. She greeted Edward as usual, offered to bring coffee, organized his schedule. But Edward watched her with eagle eyes, waiting for the right moment to confront her. "Carla," he finally said, "can you come to my office? I need to discuss some changes to the schedule." When she entered, Edward closed the door and activated the soundproofing system he used for confidential meetings. Carla sat elegantly, crossing her legs and preparing her tablet to take notes. "Carla, how long have you been working with me?" Edward asked, his voice calm but laden with palpable tension. 8 years, Edward. "Why? Is something wrong?" "Yes, something is wrong. I found out that you have a sister named Patricia." Carla's blood ran cold, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, I do. She's a journalist. Edward, what are you getting at?" Edward stood up and walked. At his desk, he picked up a sealed envelope. "I want to get to the point that you betrayed my trust, sabotaged an innocent employee, and nearly destroyed the company's reputation for personal reasons." Carla paled. "Edward, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Carla. I have recordings of all your conversations with your sister. I know every lie you spread, every manipulation you orchestrated." Edward played snippets of the recordings. Carla's voice echoed through the room, cold and calculating, destroying any possibility of denial. "Why, Carla? Why did you do this?" Carla finally dropped her mask of innocence. Her eyes filled with tears of anger and frustration. "Because I deserved a chance. 8 years, Edward, 8 years working by your side, being perfect, being everything you needed. And then a janitor shows up. And in a few weeks, she gets your attention like I never could. Carla, our relationship has always been professional. I never gave you reasons to think otherwise." "Of course you did. You trusted me, confided your problems to me, asked for personal advice. I thought that maybe one day—" Edward shook his head, feeling a mix of pity and disgust. "Carla, you are fired for cause. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. And know that you will face criminal charges for defamation and sabotage." As the security guards entered to escort Carla out, she turned to Edward one last time. "You will regret this, Edward. This woman is not from your world. She will disappoint you like all the others." After Carla's tumultuous exit, Edward immediately went down to find Mary. He found her in the women's restroom on the 18th floor, silently crying while trying to continue her work. "Mary!" She turned, her face red from crying and humiliation. "Dr. Edward, I can't work here anymore. Not after this." "Mary, Carla has been fired. She was responsible for everything. We will sue the magazine and clear your name." "It won't help!" Mary exploded, her voice echoing in the empty restroom. "The damage is already done. Everyone looks at me like I'm a gold digger who took advantage of you, and Sophie will suffer from this at school." Edward stepped closer, ignoring the inappropriate setting for this conversation. "Mary, listen to me. I won't let this destroy you. I will use every resource I have to protect you and Sophie." "Don't you understand?" Mary said, her tears falling freely. "This only proves that I was right from the beginning. People like us cannot mix. There will always be a price to pay." Edward felt as if he had been punched in the chest. "Mary, you can't give up on us because of one bitter person's lies." "It's not just the lies, Dr. Edward, it's the reality. You are a powerful, wealthy, influential man. I am a janitor with a child to raise. This was never going to work." Before Edward could respond, Mary passed by him toward the door. "I'm going to finish my shift and resign today. Please, don't make this harder than it already is." Edward was left alone in the restroom, heartbroken, realizing he was losing the woman who had changed his life, just as he discovered how much she meant to him. That afternoon, when Sophie came home from school, she found Mary packing in the small room they shared. "Mum, why are you packing our clothes? Are we going on a trip?" Mary paused, looking at her daughter with a breaking heart. How could she explain that they would need to move, switch Sophie to another school again, start over somewhere the scandal wouldn't reach them? "Sweetheart, Mommy got a job in another city. We're going to have a new adventure." Sophie frowned, her precocious intelligence picking up the nuances in her mother's voice. "But I like my new school, and Dr. Edward said he would teach me about engineering." Hearing Edward's name made Mary feel the tears return. She had made the hardest decision of her life, but she believed it was the only way to protect Sophie from the consequences of a love that, no matter how genuine, belonged to irreconcilable worlds. What Mary didn't know was that Edward was not willing to give up so easily, and that the coming days would bring twists that would test not only his determination, but also his faith in the power of true love. Saturday dawned without rain, but the heavy atmosphere remained. Mary had spent the night awake, finalizing preparations for the move she planned to make that week. She had secured a job as a janitor at a smaller company in Springfield through an acquaintance of Mrs. Johnson. The salary was lower, but it would be a fresh start away from judgmental looks and malicious whispers. Sophie played on the living room floor with her doll, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the air, but Mary noticed how her daughter watched her with concern. The girl had inherited her sensitivity and sensed that something serious was happening. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Mary opened the door, expecting to find the neighbor, Mrs. Maria, but was confronted by an unfamiliar man in a suit. "Mary Sanders, I'm Dr. Richard Taylor, attorney for Almeida Construction. Dr. Edward asked me to come speak with you." Mary hesitated. "Dr. Edward sent you here?" "I already said I don't want any more involvement." "Mrs. Mary, may I come in? It's about the magazine situation and the legal actions we are taking." Reluctantly, Mary let him in. Dr. Richard was a middle-aged man with grey hair, radiating competence and seriousness. He sat on the sofa Mary indicated and opened a folder of documents. "Mrs. Mary, first, I want you to know that we have irrefutable evidence that the published article is completely false. Carla Smith and her sister will be criminally prosecuted for defamation, slander, and libel." "Dr. Richard, I appreciate it, but that won't erase what has already been published. People have already read it. They had already formed their opinions." "That's why we're here," interrupted the lawyer. "We will demand a public retraction from the magazine in the next edition, with the same prominence as the false article. Furthermore, you are entitled to substantial compensation for emotional distress." Mary shook her head. "I don't want money from Dr. Edward disguised as compensation." "Mrs. Mary," Dr. Richard said patiently, "this compensation does not come from Dr. Edward. It comes from the magazine by law. It is your right that has been violated." Before Mary could respond, Sophie appeared in the room, curious about the presence of the elegant visitor. "Mom, who is the uncle?" "A lawyer, sweetheart. Go play in your room." "A lawyer? Just like in the movies? Do you defend innocent people?" Dr. Richard smiled at the girl. "Yes, little one. Just like in the movies." "That's cool. My mom is innocent too. She has never done anything wrong in her whole life." Sophie's words hit Mary like a bolt of lightning. For the first time, she realized that her daughter understood more about the situation than she had imagined, and more importantly, Sophie completely trusted her innocence. After Sophie returned to her room, Dr. Richard continued, "Mrs. Mary, there is something else you need to know. Dr. Edward is planning a press conference for Monday. He will publicly acknowledge that you have a relationship and deny all the insinuations from the article." Mary felt her blood run cold. "He can't do that. It will destroy his reputation. He said he prefers to risk his own reputation than let you suffer alone with the consequences of lies." Mary stood up, nervously pacing the small room. "Dr. Richard, you need to convince him not to do this. I'm leaving Springfield. I'm going to start over somewhere else. He doesn't need to sacrifice himself for me. Mrs. Mary, can I speak frankly? In 30 years of my career, I've seen many relationships in the business world. Most are based on interest, convenience, or status. What I see between you two is different. It's real." Mary stopped walking, looking at the lawyer in surprise. "Dr. Edward has changed in the last few months. He has become more human, more connected with the employees, more concerned about the social impact of the company. And this happened after he met you. At that very moment, Edward was in his penthouse apartment in Maplewood, a luxury residence with a panoramic view of the city. But that day it felt cold and empty. He had spent the entire weekend thinking about Mary, reviewing every conversation, every glance, every moment they had shared. His apartment was decorated by a famous designer, with imported furniture and artworks that cost a fortune. But Edward realized he preferred the cozy simplicity of Mary's small home. There was love there. There was real life. There was the crystal-clear laughter of Sophie echoing through the small but affectionate rooms. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Dr. Richard. "Edward, I spoke with Mary. She is determined to leave Springfield. She says she doesn't want you to sacrifice yourself for her." Edward closed his eyes, feeling a pain in his chest. "And what else did she say?" "That you shouldn't hold the press conference. That it will only harm your reputation." "Richard, my reputation is worth nothing if I can't protect the woman I love." On the other end of the line, there was a moment of silence. "Edward, are you sure about what you're feeling? Is it just guilt or a sense of justice?" Edward looked out the panoramic window, seeing the city stretch to the horizon. "Richard, in the last 15 years, I've built an empire. I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. I have power, influence, recognition, but I've never felt as alive as I have in the last few months, talking with Mary, seeing the world through her eyes." On Monday morning, the newsroom of Executives and Business was in an uproar. The editor-in-chief, Marcus Johnson, a 50-year-old man with decades of experience in business journalism, had received a call from Edward Almeida's lawyer demanding a right of reply and threatening million-dollar lawsuits. Patricia Smith was at her desk, pretending to work on other articles, but visibly nervous. She had lied to the editor about the veracity of her sources, inventing confirmations that never existed. "Patricia, my office, now," said Marcus, his voice cutting through the buzz of the newsroom. When she entered, she found not only the editor, but also the legal director of the magazine and 2 external lawyers. "Patricia, We received documentation proving that your article about Edward Almeida is completely false. Phone recordings, evidence that your sources were fabricated. You lied to us." Patricia tried to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Within hours, she was fired and facing lawsuits that could ruin her journalistic career forever. Meanwhile, Mary had made a decision that even she didn't fully understand. Instead of going to work at the company in Springfield as planned, she headed to the construction company's building. Not to work, but to have one last conversation with Edward. Mrs. Johnson greeted her with surprise and relief in the basement of the building. "Mary, I'm so glad you came. Everyone here knows that article was a lie. And look," Mrs. Johnson showed a petition that the outsourced employees had prepared with over 200 signatures, declaring support for Mary and repudiating the magazine's slanders. Mary felt her eyes fill with tears as she saw the names of colleagues she barely knew, but who had stepped up to defend her publicly. "Mrs. Johnson, where is Dr. Edward?" "In his office, preparing for a press conference." "Mary, he is going to admit that he likes you in front of all the journalists in the city." Mary took a deep breath. It was time to make the most courageous decision of her life, not for Edward, not for Sophie, but for herself. It was time to stop running and fight for what she believed in. When the elevator doors opened on the 25th floor, Mary knew her life would never be the same again, and for the first time in weeks passed, and it no longer scared her. The elevator doors opened, revealing the 25th floor in an unusual frenzy. Journalists, cameras, and filming equipment filled the space that was usually restricted to the company's executives. Mary felt her legs tremble at the sight of the crowd, but the determination that had taken over her in the last few minutes spoke louder than her fear. Anna, from HR, was the first to see her. "Mary, I'm so glad you came. Edward was, well, he was very worried thinking you had left the city." "I almost did," Mary admitted, nervously glancing at the journalists who were beginning to notice her presence. "But I realized that running away wouldn't solve anything. Where is he?" "In the conference room, reviewing what he's going to say at the press conference." "Mary," Anna hesitated, "he's really going to publicly admit that he has feelings for you. Are you ready for that?" Mary took a deep breath. "I think we're never truly prepared for some things in life. We can only have enough courage to face them." Edward was in the conference room with Dr. Richard and 2 press aides, reviewing the speech he had prepared when the door opened. Upon seeing Mary standing in the doorway, his heart nearly stopped. "Mary, I thought that I had cowardly run away," she completed, stepping into the room. "I almost did. But then I thought, if you have the courage to risk your reputation for me, maybe I should have the courage to stay and fight for the truth." Edward stood up, dismissing the others with a gesture. Once they were alone, he walked over to her, stopping just a few inches away. "Mary, you don't have to go through this. I can take all the blame, make it clear that it was my initiative." "Dr. Edward," Mary interrupted, "in the last few days, I've thought a lot about what you said. About different worlds, about what people will think. And you know what I discovered?" Edward shook his head, captivated by her determined eyes. "I discovered that if I spend my whole life hiding out of fear of others' judgment, I will never be truly happy. And Sophie will never learn that it's worth fighting for what we believe in." Edward felt an overwhelming emotion wash over him. "Mary, does this mean that—" "It means that if you really want to be part of our lives, I'm willing to try. It won't be easy. I know we'll face prejudices, nasty comments, people who will say I'm only interested in your money." "And that doesn't scare you?" Mary smiled for the first time in days. "Of course it scares me, but you know what scares me more? The idea of spending the rest of my life asking myself, what if I had the courage?" Edward could no longer contain himself. He wrapped her in his arms, holding her with an intensity that spoke of all the fears, all the uncertainties, and all the hope he had felt in the past few days. "Mary, I love you," he whispered in her ear. I love your strength, your honesty, your dedication to Sophie. I love how you make me want to be a better person. Mary pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. I love you too, Edward. I tried to deny it. I tried to run away, but I think I've loved you since that first conversation in the break room. They kissed then, a gentle kiss, but filled with all the emotions they had held back, all the unspoken words, all the moments of uncertainty that finally found their resolution. When they parted, Edward held her hands. Mary, now that we've made this decision, I need to tell you something. My daughter Isabella is coming from London next month. She's going to spend the summer here with me. Mary felt a knot in her stomach. Your daughter. Does she know about us? Not yet, but I want to introduce you. I want Sophie and Isabella to meet. If we're really going to build something together, I want it to be a real family. The magnitude of what they were deciding hit Mary like a wave. It wasn't just a relationship they were acknowledging, but the building of a united family, with all the complexities that entailed. Edward, she said, what if your daughter doesn't like me? What if she thinks I'm trying to replace her mother? Then we'll have patience and show her that there's room for everyone in a family. That love doesn't diminish when shared, it only multiplies. 30 minutes later, they walked together toward the hall where the press conference would be held. Mary had insisted on being by his side when they faced the press, even knowing that it would generate even more speculation. The hall was packed. Besides journalists specializing in economics and business, there were reporters from gossip outlets and even TV correspondents. The story had taken on a dimension neither of them had anticipated. Edward positioned himself behind the podium, with Mary by his side. The murmuring in the room ceased immediately, all cameras turning toward them. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Edward began, his voice firm and clear. I called this press conference to definitively clarify the lies published by executives and business about me and about Mary Sanders. Edward spent the next 10 minutes presenting evidence of the scheme orchestrated by Carla and Patricia Smith, showing recordings that proved the fabrication of the information. The insinuations that Mrs. Mary took advantage of her position or offered sexual favors in exchange for benefits are absolutely false and defamatory. Mary Sanders is an exemplary employee who, through her own merit, presented innovative ideas that saved hundreds of jobs in our company. Then Edward paused, looking at Mary. That said, there is one thing the article got right. I have deep and genuine feelings for Mary Sanders, and she has reciprocated those feelings. An immediate buzz filled the room. Flashes went off frantically, and several hands shot up for questions. Doctor, Edward, shouted a journalist, are you confirming a romantic relationship with a contract employee? I'm confirming that I've fallen in love with an extraordinary woman who happens to work as a contracted employee at my company, a woman who taught me more about leadership, humanity, and genuine values than any MBA or executive course. Another question came from the audience. Mrs. Mary? What do you have to say about the criticisms that you are taking advantage of the situation? Mary approached the microphone, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice coming out clear and firm. I have worked honestly since I was 15 to support my daughter. I have never asked for favors, nor have I accepted anything I didn't deserve. My relationship with Edward was born out of mutual respect and genuine admiration. If that bothers some people, I'm sorry, but I will not apologize for falling in love with an upright and generous man. The press conference continued for another 40 minutes, with Edward and Mary answering questions about their intentions, future plans, and how they intended to deal with social and economic differences. When it all ended, they walked together through the company corridors, noticing how employees greeted them with genuine smiles and words of support. The petition for support that Mrs. Johnson had shown was just a sample of the affection the employees felt for both of them. Edward, Mary said when they reached the elevator, thank you for having the courage to do this. Mary, thank you for having the courage to stay and fight with me. When the elevator doors closed, they knew they were descending not just to the lower floors of the building, but to a new phase of their lives. A phase that would be challenging, but that they would face together, with the certainty that true love is worth any sacrifice. On the other side of the city, Sophie watched the press conference on television at a neighbor's house, her eyes shining with pride as she saw her mother speaking with such dignity and courage. She didn't fully understand all the implications of what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. Her mother was the bravest person in the world, and Dr. Edward was a lucky man for having won her love. 3 months had passed since the press conference that changed everything. The summer in the city was at its peak, with the characteristic heat of December making the city sizzle. But in the air-conditioned halls of Almeida and Associates Construction, a renewed energy lingered. Mary now occupied an office on the 22nd floor as the coordinator of the Operational Optimization Program, a position created especially for her, combining her practical experience with her newly discovered passion for improving the working conditions of all employees. On that Friday morning, the day before Christmas, Mary was in her new office, organizing the final reports of the year, when Edward appeared at the door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a smile that she had learned to love deeply. "Good morning, Coordinator Sanders," he said, entering and closing the door behind him. "Good morning, Dr. Almeida," Mary replied, joking about the formality they still maintained in the workplace, even though everyone knew about their relationship. "Did you come to distract me from work?" Edward placed the cups on the table and pulled her into a hug. "I came to remind you that today is your last day of work before the holidays, and I came to ask if you are nervous about dinner tonight." "Gl," Mary sighed, resting her head on his chest. The Christmas dinner would be the first official celebration of both families together. Isabella, Edward's daughter, had arrived from London the previous week, and despite everyone's efforts, the adaptation was proving to be more challenging than they had expected. "How can I not be nervous?" Mary admitted. "Isabella still looks at me like I'm an intruder, and Sophie is trying so hard to impress her that she can hardly speak properly when they are together." Edward stroked her hair. "Give it time. Isabella has spent years hearing her mother speak poorly of me, building an image of an absent and insensitive father. Seeing that I have changed, that I am happy, is shaking her foundations. What if she never accepts our relationship?" Edward made her look at him. "Mary, my daughter is intelligent and deep down has a good heart, inherited from her mother. She just needs time to realize that you are not trying to replace her in my life, but rather to be a part of it." At that moment, Mary's phone rang. It was Sophie, calling from school to excitedly tell her about the Christmas presentation she had done. "Mom, I won first place in the family essay contest. I wrote about our new family, about how families can grow and become more beautiful when people truly love each other." Mary felt her eyes fill with tears of pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I am so proud of you." "Mom, will Isabella like the dinner tonight? I helped Grandma Johnson make those chocolate truffles that you all like." Mrs. Johnson had become a sort of adoptive grandmother to Sophie, and more recently, a precious ally in the attempt to create a harmonious family environment. She had offered to help Mary prepare a Christmas dinner that honored both Brazilian traditions and some English traditions that Isabella was accustomed to. After the call, Edward and Mary left the building together. In recent months, they had developed the habit of having lunch together whenever possible, exploring small restaurants in the area where they could talk without the pressure of curious gazes. They chose a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the same neighborhood where they had grown closer during the summer festival months before. While waiting for their meal, Edward took Mary's hand across the table. "Mary, there's something I want to talk to you about." His serious tone made her pay immediate attention. "What is it?" Isabella reached out to me last night. She said she wants to have a private conversation with you today, before dinner. Mary felt her stomach tighten. A conversation about what? She didn't want to tell me. She just asked me to arrange a moment for you to be alone. Mary took a deep breath. Isabella was a 10-year-old girl, but she possessed an impressive maturity, a result of growing up in an international environment and experiencing her parents' divorce from a very young age. She was blonde like her mother, with Edward's brown eyes and a strong personality that reminded her of both parents. "All right," Mary finally said. "If that's what she wants, let's talk." That afternoon, Mary arrived early at Edward's apartment for the final preparations of the dinner. The apartment had changed significantly since they began their serious relationship. The cold artworks had given way to family photographs, plants that Mary had brought, and some drawings by Sophie stuck on the fridge of the gourmet kitchen. Isabella was in the living room reading a book in English, wearing an elegant navy blue dress that contrasted with her tense posture. When she saw Mary, she closed the book and stood up. "Mary, can we talk?" "Of course, Isabella. Your dad said you wanted to speak with me." They sat on the living room sofa with the night view of New York sparkling through the panoramic windows. Isabella was silent for a few seconds, as if organizing her thoughts. "Mary, I want you to know that I know you are a good person," Isabella began, her voice carrying an impressive seriousness for her age. "My dad has been different since he met you. Happier, more present." Mary waited, sensing there was more to be said. "But I need to tell you something. My mom, she said things about you. She said that you are only interested in my dad's money, that you are using Sophie to get a better life." Mary felt a pang in her chest but kept a calm expression. "And do you believe what your mom said?" Isabella shook her head. "At first, I wanted to believe it. It would be easier if you were a bad person because then I could hate you without feeling guilty. But then I saw how you treat my dad, how you look at him, and I saw how you are with Sophie." Isabella hesitated, her words taking on a more emotional tone. "My mom never looked at my dad the way you do, and when she talks to me about him, there's always anger in her voice." Mary felt her heart tighten for the girl. "Isabella, you know your dad loves you very much, right? No matter what happened between him and your mom. I know. And I know he loves you too, and that you truly love him." Isabella took a deep breath. "Mary, I want to try. I want to try to like you. I want to try to be part of this new family, but I need you to understand one thing." "Say it." "I will never call you Mom, not because I don't like you, but because I already have a mom, even if she isn't perfect." Mary smiled, feeling a deep emotion. "Isabella, I never expected you to call me Mom. I hope to be your friend, someone you can trust, someone who will always cheer for your happiness." Isabella smiled for the first time since the conversation started. "I think I can do that." 2 hours later, when Sophie arrived with Mrs. Johnson, she found Mary and Isabella in the kitchen, preparing the cheesecake that would be the dessert for dinner. The two were conversing in a mix of Portuguese and English, with Isabella teaching some English words to Mary and learning Brazilian expressions in return. "Mom!" Sophie exclaimed, running to hug Mary. "Isabella is here." "Hi, Isabella. Do you want to see the chocolate truffles I made? Grandma Johnson taught me a secret recipe." Edward, who had arrived a few minutes earlier, watched the scene from the kitchen door with his heart overflowing with happiness. Seeing his two daughters interacting naturally, seeing Mary being accepted by Isabella, witnessing Mrs. Johnson being affectionately called Grandma by Sophie, all of this represented the family he had never dared to dream of having. The dinner unfolded in an atmosphere of genuine joy. Mrs. Johnson shared stories from her youth in rural Ohio. Sophie demonstrated her new English skills. Isabella tried traditional American dishes like stuffing and fruitcake for the first time, and Edward and Mary exchanged knowing glances at every special moment. When it was time to open presents, Sophie gifted Isabella a beaded bracelet she had made at school, and Isabella gave Sophie a book of English stories with colourful illustrations. Edward had bought Mary a delicate ring with a small emerald, not an engagement ring, but a promise of the future. Mary had embroidered a cushion for Edward with a phrase that summed up her feelings: "Home is where love is." But the most emotional moment of the night came when Sophie, with her characteristic spontaneity, raised her glass of grape juice and said, "I want to make a toast to the best Christmas of my life, for my family that has grown bigger and more beautiful, and because now I have an English sister who speaks 2 languages." Isabella blushed but smiled broadly. "I also have a Brazilian sister who makes the best chocolate truffles in the world." Edward and Mary looked at each other, knowing that this moment would forever be etched in their memories as the instant when 2 broken families transformed into one unique and strong family. Later, when the girls fell asleep in the guest room, Sophie had insisted on having a pajama party with Isabella. Edward and Mary stepped out onto the apartment balcony, contemplating the Christmas lights of the city. "We did it," Mary said, snuggling into his arms. "Did what?" "Built a real family with love, patience, and a lot of courage." Edward kissed her gently. "Mary, you saved not only my business with your ideas, you saved my life, taught me how to be truly happy." We saved each other. Adaptosois, Marina, Mary, Eduardo, Edward. "Mutually," corrected Mary. "You taught me that I deserve to be loved, that I can dream big without losing my essence." They stood there, embraced, knowing they would still face challenges. There would always be people questioning their relationship, always obstacles to overcome, always adjustments to make as the girls grew up. But they also knew they had something rare and precious, a love based on respect, genuine admiration, and a mutual desire to build something beautiful together. When the clock struck midnight, officially ending Christmas, Mary and Edward knew they were beginning not just a new year, but a new life. A life where a cleaning staff member and a CEO had proven that true love knows no social barriers, that happiness lies in the courage to be authentic, and that the best families are those built not just by blood ties, but by bonds of choice, affection, and mutual commitment. In the silence of that December morning, with the warmth of summer enveloping the city and the first rays of sunlight of the following day beginning to appear on the horizon, they knew they had found what most people spend their entire lives searching for: a true home in each other's hearts.